Hello and welcome to today's webinar, What's New with Harmony Smart Assistant? A couple of housekeeping items before we get started. You're welcome to submit questions at any time using the chat window on your screen. We'll address them during the Q&A session at the end of today's webinar. If we don't manage to answer all of your questions, someone will follow up with you shortly via email. If you're interested in trying out the enterprise version of Harmony, please send us a request in the chat window and someone will contact you after the webinar to get you started. We'll also make a recording of the webcast available to you within a couple of days. And it's my pleasure to introduce you to today's speaker, Richard Poole, Chief Technology Officer of EMEA at Harmony. Richard heads up the pre-sales team for Harmony across the EMEA and Asia Pacific regions, working both directly with key accounts as well as Harmony's partner channel. Bringing with him almost 20 years of experience in data management systems, Richard has helped many companies to realize the significant benefits in productivity that collaborative platforms enable. Richard, please get us started.
Thank you, Susan, and welcome everyone to this month's webinar. So what we wanted to do is give you an update really on what SmartAssistant is. Firstly, it's part of the new version of Harmony, so Harmony version 8, which was released recently, and a big part of that is around Teams, and the reason for that is that Teams is very successful. It's being very quickly rolled out across the vast majority of organizations. I think there's some pretty impressive stats on kind of usage of Teams already. Obviously, it's been around for a little while, but there's a big push from Microsoft on getting people to use Teams, both as a replacement for Skype, in terms of kind of chat and voice over IP functionality, but also it's becoming kind of like the let's say the front end to the rest of the Office 365 suite of solutions and products. So with that, we'd just like to ask you what your experience of Teams is so far.
So please let us know, are you already using Microsoft Teams organizational-wide, just in a department, but not through the organization, running a Teams pilot, planning to use it soon, or you just don't have any plans to use Teams at this time? To give Richard an idea of who's here today. All right, Richard, let's show you what you've got here.
Excellent, thank you, and thanks everyone for participating. So it's quite a spread basically, but it looks like the vast majority are doing something with Teams. Whether you're piloting it at the moment or you've already rolled it out and using it organization-wide. So absolutely, I think it's definitely representative of the kind of current market. Now, Teams is a great product and a great solution. I think it does bring together a lot of capabilities. It's quite exciting. It's moving very quickly and being enhanced all the time. But it does have some challenges that come with it. And the first challenge that we see is that Teams is great for kind of internal communication primarily, kind of, chat and team meetings and things, and so it's a solution that a lot of companies are trying to really minimize the amount of internal emails that are being sent and received, rather than email being used as a conversation type solution. Teams is replacing that, and that's great, and we do that ourselves even here at Harmony. We're heavy users of Teams, and we've really embraced it. But the fact of the matter is that you still have to use email as well, whether that's sending or receiving important communication or documentation by email, maybe with your clients and your customers or your suppliers. But there is that kind of gap between, when do I use Teams, when do I use Outlook, but also the fact that I have to use both means that there's kind of a real disconnect between, if I receive an email from a client, but I then want to discuss it in Teams, it's very difficult to kind of monitor both of those interfaces, but also kind of link the two together. So you often end up still kind of forwarding an email on that you've received and having that conversation in an email dialogue rather than using Teams when you should be. So with that, we'd just like to ask you another question on your experience.
So since you have started using Teams, has the amount of email you're using increased, decreased? You really don't see any difference? You don't know, or you're those 11% who aren't using Teams yet? Here you go, Richard.
Okay, thank you. So the largest proportion there is no real measurable difference, and that really kind of comes back to, as I was just describing, that people still need to use emails, even though they are using Teams as well. So they're using those in conjunction with each other. Now, there's some there that say the amount of email has decreased, and yes, that's kind of like that internal email, but it's not like you can disable email altogether and just use Teams. I think, realistically, you do still need to use email in certain instances. So the kind of second challenge that we see is that kind of almost Teams it causes its own problems in that it's easy to kind of create a team and create additional channels and things. So you end up with lots and lots of teams and lots of channels, particularly as you get to a larger kind of company-wide deployment. It really becomes an exponential growth of different teams and channels, and there's not too much control over the fact that all users by default can create teams and create channels. They can call them what they like. So you could be a member of 6 different teams that are all pretty much the same name, or even they could be the same name, but they might have different members and different content and different contexts. So it's quite difficult to kind of find what you actually need to access, and it's quite challenging for the end user to kind of keep a focused view of the teams that they're interested in and where they can find the content that's been shared, because it's fairly common that you think, I had a question or a discussion with somebody like a week or 2 ago, and I think it was in Teams, but I can't remember which team it was in. I can't remember what channel it was in. So you end up kind of asking the question again, and that can again kind of add to the exponential growth of the content and the teams and channels that you're working with. And with that, we'd just like to ask you a third question about your experience.
So now that you're using Teams, are you finding it easier or harder to find your documents and emails? Okay, Richard.
Okay, thank you. So again, there's the largest section of people saying that there's no major difference there, but there is another significant portion of people that are saying it's actually harder to find content, with very few people saying it's easier. So yes, exactly. I think that again kind of comes back to that scenario that we were just discussing, that more content, more areas, more places, more difficult to actually find and kind of relate content to each other. And that's where we'd like to introduce the Harmony Smart Assistant, which, as I say, is an update and a set of capabilities that we've added to the latest version of Harmony in the desktop client at the moment. So Harmony 8, which we released a couple of weeks ago. And we can see that actually there's a number of capabilities that Harmony has added that really support those two challenges and really promote the use of Teams in a better way. So it actually allows us to capture emails that we have received maybe to our personal mailbox and attachments in or important documents in those emails, and actually saving those to a team mailbox and putting the content, the documentation that's been received into the corresponding SharePoint libraries, just by simply dragging and dropping those emails or attachments into the channels that we want to share them with. But then we're actually adding what we're calling descriptive labels, which are essentially the metadata coming from the SharePoint library that's associated with that team, to allow you to actually add important information to both the documents but also the emails in SharePoint and Exchange, so that you can easily discover those and relate them for future use. So that kind of addresses the two challenges that we've just discussed of, bridging that gap between email and Teams, and being able to continue a team conversation around an email or a document, but also adding metadata to the content that you're saving so that you can find it more easily. So regarding kind of like capturing the emails and the documents, I can actually start, once I've captured that, I can start a conversation around the content, whether it's the email or the document that I want to share with my colleagues. And then I can actually launch the Teams app from that interface and continue that conversation in the Teams UI. So we're going to have a little look at how that works in real life. And we can see here, for example, in my Outlook, if I expand either the Teams and Groups section in the Harmony sidebar, or the Favorites section that we have actually expanded here, we can see that I've got access to the teams that I'm a member of, and I can choose which ones I want to see, whether I want to make them visible in the Harmony UI or not. And likewise, I can also say which channels within those teams I want to see and utilize from a Harmony point of view as well. So in this instance, I may want to actually take an email that I've received, like this this email I've just highlighted, with a requirements document attached to it, but I don't want to forward that on. I just want to share it with my team and then start working with it with the other members of my team. So if I drag and drop the email into, let's take this general channel that I'm working on or a member of at the moment. So I'm going to drag it onto there, and what's happening in that instance is that it's saving the email to the team mailbox, and it's saving the document to the team files, so the underlying SharePoint library that's associated with that particular channel. And we'll see now that where we talked about kind of adding those kind of descriptive labels to organize my content, if I click on the metadata that's being displayed here, that metadata is actually coming from the associated SharePoint library. So now I could tag this maybe for a particular account. In this case, it was relating to this Ravenwood project that we're actually working in. So now I can go ahead and save that content. The email, as I say, is being saved to the team mailbox, but also the document is now being checked into SharePoint. So it supports all the kind of document management capabilities coming from the SharePoint platform. So I actually want to check that document in and make it available to other users. Now, once those have been saved, you'll see that I can start a conversation directly from the Harmony sidebar. So I have an opportunity to start a conversation about the content that I just saved and then I can choose to continue that conversation in the Teams interface. By clicking on that, I can see that the content has been shared with the team, and it's posted a conversation around those items. Now, obviously, the other members of my team can reply to that, or we can have Teams meetings and things. So let's say, let's discuss this in our weekly meeting. And we can continue that. Now, everybody who's accessing that conversation in that channel from the Teams interface can also open up the email. Just by clicking on the email there, you'll see that they can review the content that's been shared. And so this is the email that was received originally, and it's actually got a link to the document in the corresponding SharePoint location. But from here, those other team members can actually reply to the email. So it doesn't have to be the person who received the email in this case. It could be somebody else who needs to actually maybe ask some further questions or reply to it with a response on those requirements documentation. Equally, in that Teams interface, I can get to the specific document as well, so it'll open up from SharePoint. Let's just go back to our slides here, because there's more that we can do with that, because not only can I save the content to my Teams locations, but also I can share content directly to my other Harmony favorites. So if you're familiar with Harmony, maybe if you're an existing user or you've already been evaluating the Harmony sidebar, you'll notice that you can actually navigate to SharePoint locations and mark them as favorite locations. And with the Harmony UI in Harmony 8, I'm actually able to drag and drop content not only to my teams and channels, but also to my other Harmony favorites as well. And this is something that I think a lot of our customers have been asking for a while, because the favorites mechanism is quite useful, because you can have different locations coming from different libraries. There could be filtered views in different libraries or folders or document sets, for example. So in this case, if I've got maybe a document that I want to save to a particular library, then I can simply drag and drop that into the location that I want to put that into, and then you'll see the corresponding content types and properties and things are displayed to the user in order to select those. So I'm just going to fill in the necessary properties and the content type for that item without having to drill down into that particular location. So that's a really nice enhancement that I wanted to save into. Hold on a second. Let me just move the control out of there. And as well as extending that kind of drag and drop functionality, as we saw when I captured the email and a document to a Teams channel, we've also added that metadata capability. So we're extending SharePoint metadata beyond the SharePoint content, because the email is actually going into the team mailbox, and I'm adding that metadata to the email messages that have been saved as well. And we'll see in a moment where those can be used to actually discover content, because when I click into the actual team or the channel in the Harmony interface, we'll see that it will actually retrieve the related content around both the channel, the team, and those descriptive labels that we've actually been adding. So as an example of that, if we now go into that global sales general channel that we shared that content with previously, and just double click on that, you'll see that now it actually shows me related content that's been saved in that particular channel. So it could be the email, and you'll see that the metadata has been assigned to that email, or it could be the document. Likewise, I can then navigate around the rest of, for example, the team. So not just one channel, but I can open it up to all the channels in that team. So now I can see that there's lots of other content that's been saved and shared with the rest of the team. But equally, again, I can use the metadata or the descriptive labels to filter that information. So now if I select different items, you'll see that the metadata is reflected accordingly. So now if I want to filter all of the content in that team just for the Ravenwood project that I'm working on, we can see all of the content that's been shared and tagged with that specific information. And also in Harmony 8, to kind of improve the user adoption of the solution, we've actually extended the online help from our website into the product itself. So we've always had like training videos and online documentation available on the Harmony website, but making it available at your fingertips, at the user's fingertips, so that they can easily work with the product and find out more about some of the functionality maybe that they're not familiar with. It can really help the end user and the rollout of the solution to the audience. So if we go and have a look at how that is rendered in Harmony, if I click on the drop-down menu there, then click on the online help, we'll see that the help articles are displayed in its own sidebar next to the Harmony sidebar. So it means that now, like if I want to find out more about kind of getting started with Harmony, how do I connect to a SharePoint site, for example, there's not only instructions, but also training videos available in that interface as well. And everything is contextual there as well. So if I want to find out more, then I can easily navigate around that content in a really nice and intuitive manner. So if we go back to those challenges that we were talking about earlier of, bridging the gap between Outlook and Teams, but also bridging the gap between finding content by classifying it in the necessary way. Another challenge is how to retain emails and documents in a Teams environment for compliance. So Microsoft is also working on the kind of compliance center capabilities with regard to retention labels, to define policies on how long certain content should be retained for, or when it should be disposed of, and those kind of things. So for example, if we go back to our kind of scenario where we're working before, where we've actually got those requirements that we captured, and even from this kind of drill down Teams view, I can say that I want to open up the location where that content has been saved. And that will take me to the SharePoint library where that document resides. So now I've got my kind of normal Harmony capabilities of working with all the SharePoint capabilities in this particular environment. And if I right click on that document, I can edit it, I can check it out, I can preview all those kind of things that you may already be familiar with in Harmony. But also I can now apply retention labels to that content. So for example, now this might be a legal contract or a document that I now need to retain for a minimum period. So let's say it needs to be retained for a minimum of 7 years in this particular instance. So not only can I apply that label, I can also see when it's been applied, And also, if somebody tries to delete that content before that retention policy, that retention period has actually lapsed, then they won't be able to do that. So you can see that now that that label has been applied, I can't edit or delete the item. So it's been retained as a record for a minimum period of time. Once that period of time has elapsed, I will then be able to delete or dispose of that content. So the real value of Harmony 8, including the Harmony Smart Assistant technology and feature set, is that it really drives Teams adoption and improves the way that people can utilize Teams in conjunction with Outlook, so that you can capture emails and documents from your clients, work on them internally, discuss your responses and things, and then get back to them accordingly, using standard kind of Harmony functionality with the Teams and the SharePoint and Exchange capabilities in the back end. But also we're extending capabilities that you've got in SharePoint, like the metadata, as descriptive labels to content that you're saving in Exchange as well in a shared space. So we'd like to offer that you can try Harmony 8 if you're not already an existing customer. If you are already an existing customer, then you can always download the latest version of Harmony from your secure download area. If you don't have your login details, please reach out to us and we'll provide them to you. But if you're not a customer, then you can also evaluate the Harmony 8 capabilities as well as the rest of the Harmony suite using the QR code in front of you.
Or you could answer the question on your screen now that you would like to trial Harmony, and somebody will reach out to you after the webinar. So please let us know if you'd like to be contacted as a customer with questions to trial it. Just you have questions, or no, Richard did such a good job explaining everything that you have no questions. And while you're answering that, Richard, there are actually a couple questions that came in.
Okay.
Let's see, the first question is Harmony 8 backward compatible for users who are not yet using Office 365 and Teams, but still need SharePoint on-prem?
Yes, absolutely. We fully support both SharePoint Online and SharePoint On-Premise. In fact, we still support, I think, SharePoint 2010 or maybe even 2007 upwards. But yeah, a lot of the functionality, obviously, that we've demonstrated today is specifically around Teams, which is in Office 365. But if you're not using Teams, then you just wouldn't see the Teams functionality. You would still continue to utilize the kind of standard functionality that we have in the sidebar. And as I say, some of the other capabilities like the embedded help, the drag and drop on top of favorites and things will all work with an on-prem environment as well.
Great, thank you. How do I see my Teams in Harmony? You showed it, but I don't see it.
Okay, excellent. So good question. Let's just have a look at my environment. So the first thing that you need to do is to enable the option to see your teams and groups under the People tab here. So if you just go into the options, click on the People section, you've got an option to say show show Office 365 teams and groups. Once you've enabled that, it will need to authenticate with the graph in order to return the teams and groups that you're a member of. And then, for example, if you go to your All Locations view, you'll see the node here for teams and groups. If you select on that icon, then you'll see it will retrieve all the teams and groups that you're a member of. So, for example, here you can see I've got a number of teams like this global sales one we saw before, and then I can right-click on the ones that I want to see and say add to my favorites. And then those will appear in that favorites view as well. So you can actually use this interface to drag content in, or you can add them to your favorites interface and have like a more focused view on just the teams and the channels that you want to see.
Thank you. So does Teams replace the need for SharePoint?
No, I think we see that it complements it. I think SharePoint is more geared towards, let's say, more organized, structured content, maybe more records management and like as I say, a kind of records management solution or a document management solution with with content types and lots of metadata and things. And Teams is more for um, kind of work in progress or collaboration spaces that people can easily create, start sharing some content with people, but they can work on it directly from the Harmony interface. And having that kind of UI where I've got a combined view of Teams and SharePoint libraries allows me to actually take content from one to another, maybe take some content that's been shared with the team and put it into a SharePoint library or a different SharePoint area. It might also be that like certain areas of the business are using Teams as their main platform, whereas other areas, maybe legal, for example, are using SharePoint. So we don't see it as a replacement, but as an extension and to complement each other, really.
Okay. Let's see. If you add retention labels to content in a team, does that mean the team can't be deleted until the retention is expired?
So when you create a team, it creates their SharePoint library that's associated with that. Now, obviously, if you've put content in the SharePoint library, you've applied retention labels to it, so that content can't be deleted, then the SharePoint library can't be deleted. That's not to say that the team couldn't be kind of locked down or hidden from the interface or whatever, and you may be able to delete the team, but keep the SharePoint library.
Okay, there are a lot of questions that seem to be, I think we're going to have to follow up with individually, but I'm going to give you one last question. Where do the descriptive labels come from?
So, as I said, the descriptive labels are the metadata that's defined in the SharePoint library. So, for example, if we take this, the library that we were using before, we'll see here, if I just right click on the properties here and edit them, this is SharePoint metadata. So like the account name that we used earlier. Now that is being used to write that property to the content in SharePoint, in this case the document, but equally the email that's been shared in the team mailbox, it's being added as a property to the email.
Okay. As I said, there are quite a few questions, Richard, but I think I'm going to ask you to reach out to these people, or we'll send someone else to, because a lot of
Okay.
them are very personal. So
Yeah, cool.
thank you for that great presentation and demonstration. Thank all of you for joining us today. You will receive an email with a link to view the webinar again within a couple of days, and we look forward to meeting you again in our next webinar. Thank you.
Thanks.